My name's Robbie Luckett. I'm an associate professor of history and director of the Margaret Walker Center and Cothos Civil Rights Education Center at Jackson State University. I'm conducting this oral history from my home in Jackson, Mississippi via Zoom as part of the Mississippi Arts Commission's Folk Life and the Civil Rights Movement in Mississippi project. Today is Thursday, February 25th, 2021. It is 2:20 p.m. Central Time. I'm joined today by Dr. Doris A. Derby, who is joining this oral history from her home in Atlanta, Georgia. First of all, Dr. Derby, can you state and spell your full name?
Dr. Doris, Doris, A period, Derby, Derby,
Do I
or
have,
Doris Adelaide Derby, capital Adelaide.
do I have your permission to record this interview?
Yes, you do.
Dr. Derby, can you tell us when and where you were born?
I was born in New York City, November 11th, 1939. That day is otherwise known as Armistice Day or Veterans Day.
Can you tell us a little bit about your parents and how you grew up?
I am the second child of parents that had 3 children. I have an older sister, a year and a half older, and I have a younger brother who is about 9 years younger than I am, and he is deceased. He is a medical doctor, physician, and he died in 2015 from the ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. My sister is still living. She lives in Atlanta, as do I. I grew up in New York. This was between the First World War and the Second World War. My father was, he served in the reserves, Army Reserve, the 369th Division, Harlem Division, which was segregated at the time. My mother is a homemaker. She's from Bangor, Maine, a very prominent family there. And my father's parents are from Boston, Massachusetts. Growing up in New York, it was about when I was about a year and a half. My father bought a house in a 2-family house in Williamsbridge in the Bronx. It was 2 lots, one for the house and one on the side, which my father was an urban farmer. He raised chickens and ducks and all kinds of vegetables and fruits and fruit trees. He was also, he was a university graduate, the University of Pennsylvania in civil engineering in 1930 or 31. And he was an athlete as well. I remember one story that he told us that when he was at the university and he was to get some athletic awards, and he went to the place where they were going to be providing awards for all the different students, and they told him that he had to use the service elevator, and that was his time for being a demonstrator or a protester, where he left the building and did not go to receive his formal award. He refused to use the service elevator. My father was a member of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, which he pledged in 1927. And my mother was a homemaker from Bangor, Maine, within a family of 11 children. Her mother was a civil rights leader. She and her eldest son joined the NAACP in Bangor, Maine in the early 1920s. She was, her son was a vice president. They were founding members, charter members, and I have documents that show that the two of them were founding members and he was the vice president. And my grandfather, her husband, was a prominent, very successful businessman in Bangor. There were only about 20, a small number of Black families. And my grandmother was a leader in the community. She was a member of the Mothers Club of Black women who were in the club to help each other, help mothers. And they were part of that National Association of Black Negro Women's Clubs. My grandfather, as I said, was a very successful businessman. He came from Virginia, went through Boston, and lived there for a little while, and then came to Bangor, Maine, settled there. He came up that way in 1870.
I'm probably going to ask you to do this from time to time, but if you would, please tell me your parents, grandparents, and siblings' names, and if you would spell them for us for the record.
My maternal grandparents, my mother's father was William Alonzo Johnson. My maternal grandmother was Edith May Delaney Johnson. She came from the Virgin Islands in Haiti with her older sister and her sister's husband on a ship. I'm not sure of the date, but she was born in 1870. She was about, I understand that she was about between like 10 or 11 when they came on the ship. And they went to Boston first and then came to Bangor, Maine. My grandfather was from a large family. I think he had 3 brothers from Virginia, around the Richmond area. It was another town, it was a smaller area, but then was incorporated into Richmond. So we don't know the exact town. My grandfather was married first with someone else who got sick and passed away. And then he married my grandmother, who was quite young. She was 17 when she got married. We have a beautiful picture of her in a beautiful wedding dress. And she had a lot of talent. She spoke French, and she had all kinds of skills with her hands, with sewing and crocheting and making. She made costumes for the community in Bangor when they had masquerade parties and different things like that. She had a nanny that helped take care of the children. Some of the children died before they reached adulthood, as you know, the medical issues back then. I remember that my uncle, my Uncle Earl, he was the second youngest child, and he's the one that lived the longest in Bangor, Maine. And he had when we went up there, he showed us that he had, the family had a very, very gigantic, almost probably 12-inch book of medical, all different things you should do when, medical practices. And that's what they used to, in addition to whatever doctors they had. All of the children that reached adulthood finished high school. They were all very talented, and they all of them they all studied a musical instrument. 4 of the children were so talented that they were in a band, the Johnson Family Band. My aunt played the aunt who was born, Julia Valentine Johnson Green, was a percussionist. She played drums and the xylophone. She actually had the xylophone in her home in New York after she had migrated to New York. Another aunt, Vivian Johnson Brooks, played the piano. She was going to be a symphony pianist. She did get admitted to a special musical academy in Chicago. Another aunt was a bassist, played the bass. That was Aunt. Can't think of who that was right now. And then my uncle, Alonzo W. Johnson, the eldest son, the one who was the charter member of the NAACP, he played the violin. He integrated the Bangor Symphony Orchestra. He also integrated the University of Maine. He was not able to finish because my grandfather died and he took over the business and dropped out of the university. As I said, all the children finished high school that lived beyond that age. My aunt Julia took up executive secretarial work after she graduated, or probably she took typing and whatnot while she was in high school. She later on migrated to New York City, and after she was there, she was an excellent executive secretary for the government in New York. I guess it was the state government. When the government in Washington was looking for Black women, colored women as they were called, to integrate the secretarial pool, they sought her out and asked her to go to Washington to be a secretary, integrating the pool there. And she did go. I was trying to look that up to see when the secretarial or administrative assistance pool in the government in the early 40s, when was that, when and what was involved with that. But I couldn't see, I didn't find anything. So Robbie, that's your assignment. So we can find out about my aunt and what she did there and how long and what was involved. I think there was like 10 or 12 women. She was, before she moved, she migrated from Bangor to Boston, and then Boston to New York, and then she worked in Washington and came back to New York some years later. When she was in Boston, she did say that she was a secretary to W.E.B. Du Bois. And in the, I guess, in the NAACP office that he had. My eldest aunt, she was the one who was quite a musician, and she married a young man named Frederick Brooks, and who, when he actually in later life did his research on his family history, he found out that he was related to a queen in one of the queens in England. His relatives migrated to Canada, from Canada to, and then he came to Maine. That's my aunt's husband. Now, he had a job working through college and through dental school. And he would, he had a job on the railroad. And he would ride the train from Chicago to Bangor. And since there weren't very many Black families in Bangor, Black people, and I guess they didn't have any place to stay, when a person came there, I guess maybe the hotels didn't let them stay there. At any rate, people told him that when he would get to Bangor, he should look up the Johnson family and they would be very nice to him. So they had him for dinner every Sunday. And that's when he caught the eye of my Aunt Vivian. My grandfather evidently told him that no wedding, no marriage until he finished what he was doing, and when my aunt reached a certain age. And they later married. And they went off to Boston. He had finished his dental school at Tufts. And when he got out, he was looking for a way to practice his dental profession. And he had to find a dentist that would take him in or help him to establish his business. But he was not able to do that, as of course, there was racial prejudice. He and his wife, well, while they lived in Boston, I remember my aunt said that she eventually had 3 boys. The first boy, they couldn't get to the doctor in time, so she delivered the baby herself at home. They migrated eventually to Boston, to Brooklyn, New York. And I'm told that he was not able to ever get employment in a dentist's office. And as I knew him when I was growing up, he was a red cap in the airport, in LaGuardia Airport, in order to help his family to take care of his family. That's what he had to become. But he was brilliant, and he did a very thorough research of his family history on this, both sides, but particularly he found out about his relationship to one of the queens. I have it in one of my papers, which queen it was in the picture. And he showed that he had a picture of himself when he was young, and he looked like very much like one of the prince or someone in England. They had 3 boys in Brooklyn. So my mother migrated eventually from Maine, from Bangor, to New York. My mother, Lucille Johnson Derby. And she met my father, Hubert Allen Derby, after he had graduated from the University of Pennsylvania and come over to New York to get work. He graduated with a civil engineering job, but faced discrimination in that industry. He did have a few jobs with them, but he found that they were prejudiced and would not allow him to do what he did and to sign his name to his drawings and get credit and so on and so forth. So at some point he decided to get out of that and to take a job with the civil service, the New York State Civil Service Employment Agency. With the New York State Civil Service, you just had to take examinations and you could move up if you passed the examination. He moved up to the top, and the top was prior to becoming a manager or on the managerial level, assistant, associate, or full manager. That's when he faced discrimination. Now, before I go into that, I just want to say that the four musicians in my mother's family that they had a band, the Johnson Family Band, and they integrated the theater, the Bijou Theater in Bangor, where they had the four of them played in a little band, quartet, during the beginning, the middle, and the end of the silent movies. And sometimes they accompanied the movie itself, the story. And so they were quite well known for their musical talents. My grandfather died unexpectedly, as I mentioned, and so his son, the eldest son, had to take over the business. So he didn't finish the university. And then eventually something happened later and he passed away, and another son, the youngest one, Earl, took over the business and kept it and changed it a little bit from what it was. I do want to mention that, as I said, there was a NAACP that was founded in the 1920s. There is a book called Black Bangor by Professor Maureen Elgersman Lee. She details the life of that small Black community from the late 1800s to the middle 1940s. There did exist a Ku Klux Klan group in a neighboring town. So sometimes the question comes up about prejudice and racism, etc., north-south. So there was the threat of a Klan in the nearby area. But fortunately, as far as I know, the Black community in Bangor did not have those kind of direct physical violence, even though there were some areas of prejudice there, certain kind of jobs that they didn't get. Some of the people were teachers, and they worked in caretaking and that kind of thing. Now, going back down to New York, my Aunt Vivian, this was Aunt Vivian that played the bass in that group. So going back to when they migrated, Aunt Vivian was the first one and Uncle Fred, they were the first ones that migrated. And then my mother migrated and she stayed with my Aunt Vivian in Brooklyn. They had quite a large apartment, which once they got that, they stayed in that apartment for years. And luckily it had uh, rent control. And so they had a good deal there with payment for the rent. When my mother met my father in New York, after that, and they got married, they stayed with my aunt when my sister was born. And my aunt had three sons. My aunt and Uncle Fred and Vivian had three sons. So they were an extended family there. And then my father got the house in the Bronx, and that's where we lived, and where my mother lived until she died when she was in her 90s.
What were your siblings' names, Dr. Derby?
My sister's name is Pauline Elaine Derby. Roland, first marriage, Scott. My brother's name is Hubert Allen Derby. My sister had two children, a boy and a girl, Lisa and Wayne. My brother had two children, Brian and Lauren. His first wife's name is Leslie Tanner Moore Derby. She has Tanner in her name and her children because she was related to the well-known artist Henry Ossawa Tanner. And his second wife is Pat Patricia Flannery, my brother's second wife. And my brother died in 2015 from Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. Not Alzheimer's, but ALS. My brother he did his undergraduate work at Howard University, his graduate work at Tufts Medical School, and then his specialty at Duke in family practice. He later became a emergency physician, ER, emergency room, and that he really liked that. He was an extraordinary outdoorsman, and he and his second wife he taught her how to go on mountain climbing, and they went on the Appalachian Trail from Georgia through Maine. When they finished, they went and spent time with my Uncle Earl. Uncle Earl was the only son of my grandmother, only child of my grandmother, who stayed in Bangor, Maine, and married locally. Now, the person that he married was white. They had three daughters, and basically, they married white, and of course, their children are going into the white community. One of the daughters left Bangor, married a military person, and settled in Texas. We kept in touch with them from time to time, but we lost touch. Another daughter, Betty Lou, she came to some of our family functions outside of Bangor. She was a teacher, and she married a principal, I believe it was. And not really, they would go away south to Florida. You kind of lost touch with them. And the middle daughter, she lives in Maine. but we weren't that much in touch with her. But we all went to the funeral, of course, and we had a nice family reunion with all the relatives. Um, so my sister's children, my brother's children mentioned. One of my brother's daughter lives in Atlanta here. And my sister, her husband passed away. She lived in New York and she has moved here. She had 2 children and one of them passed away a couple of years ago, the son, Wayne, and her daughter, Lisa, lives here in Atlanta and works for Grady Hospital as a top administrator.
Thank you for all of that, Dr. Derby. I want to, if we can, return and talk a little bit more about your own personal experiences and particularly how you chose to go to Hunter College in New York and what your experience was like there.
Well, living in New York City, we have the advantage that there are city colleges that you can go to for free. And Hunter College, which is a women's college or university, was in Manhattan. However, they had a Bronx division. After the First World War, after the first or the second one, after the second one, I guess, they had an armory in the Bronx, which became the uptown division of Hunter College. So that was pretty close to us. And if you had a certain grade point, you would be able to go there for free. So my sister went there first, and I went there after. And we got in according to our higher grade point and didn't have to pay anything. So it really didn't, we just thought that that's where we would go because we were paying for it with our taxes, and we thought that we could get a very good education there. Interesting enough, the Bronx division of Hunter College was co-ed. So that worked out quite well. It was interesting. It was small. Since it was an armory for the military, it had all kinds of underground rooms, offices. So in the wintertime, which was great, you didn't really have to go outside very much. You could go to all the buildings, most of the buildings, through the underground and come up. Any new buildings that were built, and there were a few after the military had it, they were built above ground without the underground. Hunter College is a great school, and you could get your books for free the first 2 years of your books that you needed books, the required courses. People could sell them back, and then you could borrow them, or you could buy them cheap. You could borrow them and then give them back. It was quite a long distance. Sometimes when the weather was bad and the buses didn't come, we would walk all the way. We had 2 buses to take from our house. Sometimes we would walk all the way from the first bus, which was probably a couple of miles. And then if that one didn't come, we'd have to walk all the way from that area to the other bus, to the campus. We often would walk one way, usually after the one that was the second bus. I think that's why I can walk pretty good now, because I had a lot of exercise, and of course I studied dance all my life, so I'm pretty good. I can bend down at the waist and touch my toes and all of that. Um, so Hunter College had what I wanted. Well, actually, when I was in junior high school, I wanted to be a dancer, a ballet dancer. I studied ballet and tap in elementary school. And my father, when we talked about it, he said, well, what happens if you break a leg? My father was very practical and very industrious and hardworking. So I said, well, you're right. And I like children. I used to teach in summer church school. So I said I would be a teacher. Um, but at Hunter College, you couldn't major in education. You had to minor in it, even though the minor was more credits than the major, because they wanted you to have something else besides education. They wanted you to have a specialty. So I decided to major in cultural anthropology, because growing up in New York, traveling around with the great train system, bus system, you didn't have to have a car. We could get around. We used to have relatives in the different parts of New York, and we would just go on the trains, and I would see all the interesting people and hear the different languages and see the different kind of clothes people were wearing. And so I said, that's what I like. I like the variety. And so I had a double major, cultural anthropology, and I was getting especially interested in African studies, and that became my specialty.
And what led you to teaching in Yonkers Elementary School, and what was your experience like there?
Well, when I got out, I wanted to uh, get a teaching position as soon as possible. In 1960, I graduated. Let's say I went to college in 1957, and I was to graduate in the spring of 1961. However, a couple of things happened. In 1960, I won a scholarship to the NAACP to work to participate in the experiment in international living and travel and live in Nigeria, West Africa for the entire summer. That was something that I had wanted to do from the time I was in junior high school. My aunt, my great aunt, my grandmother's aunt, was a missionary in Liberia, West Africa. And she used to write letters to my grandparents, and they would read them to us. And so I always had the idea that I wanted to know firsthand what Africa was like. And so in 1960, I had the opportunity. I ran into a young man that was at Yale University, and I was excited to tell him what I was going to do in 1959. And I was going to live on an Indian reservation, Navajo Indian reservation, at an Episcopal mission. And he said, well, that was great, but he was going to go to Nigeria and spend the summer there. So I says, oh, well, I want to do that too. And he said, well, I'll tell you when I come back how it is, and I'll tell you how to go. And so Putney, Vermont was the headquarters for the Experiment in International Living. And I did go. And that summer, my parents celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. And that was, I dressed up in my African dress, and we had our relatives there, and I told them about Africa and so on, showed them pictures. The following October, my father died of a stroke. And so, so our plans had sort of changed a little bit. And the stress, there was a lot of there was a lot of stress on my father, which I'll tell you about, the discrimination he faced in the New York State Employment Service. And while my father was alive in the late 50s, he and 3 of his colleagues at the New York State Employment Service faced discrimination on the managerial level. The managers would say that the prospective managers, when they took the test, the written test, they passed with high flying colors. However, the oral exam, they failed. And so my father said, well, he'll take a couple of courses at New York, NYU, New York University, and he'll develop his skills, although he already had a lot of skills and he was active in the community, in the Boy Scouts. He was a Boy Scout leader. He was a member of his bridge club. He was in his own fraternity, etc., business fraternity also. And he took his classes and took the exam again, and they said he failed again, the oral exam. And he talked to some of his colleagues and found out that there were others that had the same experience. And so they decided to form an organization to fight discrimination in the New York State Civil Service, particularly in his unit, and then later on it spread. Well, that was stressful too, because they had to be very clandestine about it. And they would meet at the house, and I would sort of listen to what was happening, and my father would tell me a little bit. So they got the services, they secured the services of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Constance Baker Motley, attorney, well-known attorney, took the case. And I'm going to find out about that case. That's another thing that I need to look up to research. He died in 1960 after they had filed a case. And the case was eventually won. And it's just that he didn't live to know what happened. But he knew that he was right. And so when you talk about who was I influenced by, et cetera, my father was, my grandparents and my parents were major persons. That's an Amber Alert. And so they were, the discrimination was right there up close and personal in our family. So when the sit-ins and the discrimination and everything and was out in the newspapers and racism and all of that, when that was coming out, 1960, 61, I was active on campus at Hunter College, and I worked with the Northern Students Movement, and on the campus we had a Protestant association, and there was a lady, can't think of her name. I think her name was Jean. She was in charge of that. And the NACP we had, and we had the NACP student group and the student government. So we had people from those groups. We decided to do a freedom ride and go to North Carolina to talk with the students that were meeting and demonstrating sit-ins and whatnot. So that was like our own homegrown freedom ride.
What year was that?
That was in 1961, spring of 1961. So we didn't have any incidents on the bus. And we spoke to students who at that time were some of the students evidently that were organizing for SNCC. And we talked to some of the community leaders, we talked to some white students, and we also talked to Robert, what was his name? Robert, not Robert Walker, Robert, all of a sudden I can't think of it. He was a freedom fighter.
Robert Williams?
Yeah, Robert Williams. And then also the head of CORE in North Carolina, in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina. You see his face right now, I just can't think of it right now. So we met with them and other leaders that weren't so well known. And that was the spring of 61. I was supposed to graduate that spring, but I postponed it because I had to have a whole semester of student teaching, which I had to choose if I was going to do that spring semester. And so I decided to graduate after the fall semester and devote that to my student teaching. So that's why January of 62 is when I graduated from Hunter. That was like the graduation, you were finished the end of December, but the graduation was after you came back from the break. One of the persons that I was a student at Hunter College downtown was Peggy Damon Day Priestley. We knew each other from around in the community and some of the people I socialized with. And she was at Hunter downtown. And we did some civil rights activities together. She started to work with SNCC. She was working with SNCC that spring of 62 and decided to go to Albany, Georgia to work with SNCC. I started teaching in Yonkers, but we were keeping in contact. And when I would leave school teaching, I would, couple of days a week, I would go to the SNCC office, the newly established SNCC office. No, wait a minute. It was the Friends of SNCC, spring of 62. Spring of 62, Friends of SNCC. And so, let's see, no, that first semester, I was teaching and still living at home, my sister, my brother, and I. Taking classes also at night. Started working on my master's in education. I chose Yonkers, the school in Yonkers, because it was very close. Where we lived in the Bronx was like near the end of the Bronx, and Mount Vernon was the next community, Westchester. We were like 10 blocks from Westchester, beginning of Westchester. And that's the first job that came through. And I enjoyed it, the third grade, really enjoyed it. So Peggy went to Albany, Georgia, and she started working there and worked in Americus, I believe it was, with an older outstanding civil rights woman called Mama Dodley, Mama Dolly, Mama Dolly. And it was really a lot going on over there. It was really dangerous. And so in this, like towards the end of the spring, I heard that Peggy had been arrested. She was in jail and that she was sick. Also, I was looking to see about going to graduate school after a couple of years. I had a friend who was in Mexico in graduate school, and it was a school there that combined what I was interested in, because something that I didn't tell you about was my whole artistic development during, junior high, elementary school through high school and college. I was very much involved in the arts. And I thought there was a school there that had a major in a master's in anthropology and the arts and art history. So I was going to go visit my friend Betty. I was going to take the bus and go down there, but make a lot of stops. Back then, you could travel on Greyhound and the other bus line, and you can get on and off. You just get your ticket where you wanted to get on and get off, and you just, that's all. You didn't have to pay anything else. So that's my being on a budget. That's how I used to like to travel, and that's how I traveled when I worked on the Navajo Indian Reservation. When I started in New York, and I broke up the trip and got to New Mexico, and then I went to Arizona and Colorado, and then we ended up going out to California and seeing relatives. That was in 1959. So I already knew how to do that. And I was going to go to Albany. So I decided I would go and see how Peggy was doing, because her mother said she was sick. And some of the people that I knew from the movement, when I was sort of in between Hunter and whoever else I was in touch with, said, you should go to Atlanta first and then go to Albany. And then you can go with them. Some of the SNCC people will take you over to Albany. It's better that you go with some people, some movement people. So I planned my trip after I finished my elementary school, because you had the summer off. That's one thing that I liked about teaching. And so when I got to Atlanta, everything is sort of like happens as it can happen. And so they said, well, we're not ready to go over there yet. So you'll just stay in the office and you can you met this person, that person, and we need you to do this or that. Can you do this and that? Answer the phone or type up something or whatever. So I ended up staying there about a week or so before they were ready to go. And then Jim Foreman, who was the head of SNCC then, and I remember Bob Zellner from Alabama, SNCC Alabama. At least it was the two of them and myself who were going to go. I'm not sure if there was anyone else in the car. And we went over to Albany, and they found a place for me to stay. It was the family of a lady who was the head of the Deltas at that time. So they put me in with the family, and the next day said, we'll come by and get you. And they did, and they said, well, we need you to do this, that, and other thing in the office. So before I knew it, I was working. Well, Peggy isn't here. We're not going out to Americas right now. It's all kinds of things that were happening in. So I met different people in the office, and Andy Young and Ralph David Abernathy and Dr. King and Septima Clark and Dorothy. Um, Nell Ponder. Um, Eventually Penny Patch and Charles Sherrod, of course, who's with SNCC. So many different people that were working there. The Albany Movement Office, the attorneys and all that. And I was saying that I, wanted to get a chance to go see Peggy, and they said, well, we can't. They're not going out there yet. We'll see if we can. So it kind of got delayed, but then they kept asking me to do things because I did have a lot of skills, and we need you to do this, that, and other thing. And there's a mass meeting. We're going to go to a mass meeting. We need to go knock on doors for voter registration. So before I knew it, I was doing all these things with them. They wanted me to go to the jail and talk to the SNCC, the young people that were there, SNCC, and see how they were doing. Look up and kind of just act nonchalant and kind of see what they were saying. And I was, to a large extent, I was by myself, and it's like they didn't think there was any problem. So I went, but when I look back, I thought, okay. Well, I did have some NAMAS training for demonstrations. We practiced, and but then they asked me to do something else, so I wasn't on any of the big demonstrations because they had me doing something else in the office or some other things. Well, I wasn't able to see Peggy. There was a lot of things, dangerous things happening, and they had me doing other things, asked me to do other things, and I didn't get there. I didn't see her. I ended up staying the whole summer. I didn't go to Mexico. And Charles was asking me to get things from New York, send for this, send for that. And the whole summer was gone, and it was like just so many things happening so fast. People were being arrested, they were being hurt, demonstrators, and it was a war zone there. And then later on, it certainly was a war zone in Mississippi. One thing I did that hit the New York Times, there was a lot of integration of churches going on in Albany. So they hit the Baptist churches and the Presbyterian and whatever. And they said, we want to hit the Episcopal Church. We want to integrate the Episcopal Church, but we don't have any Episcopalians around. Any Black Episcopalians around? No. But there was one, and that was me. Because I was really officially, I was christened in the Episcopal Church. Although I became a member of two churches, the Episcopal Church and the Baptist Church. I was an informal member of the Baptist Church because three of my girlfriends that lived on the block, my best girlfriends, they were Baptists, and the church was right down the street, and we'd go down there for all kinds of activities. So I said, okay, I will see about integrating the Episcopal Church. and we set up the date. And, someone that came for me to pick me up and take me there and said, well, go for it. Go up and see. So I did, and I got in. I integrated the Episcopal Church that Sunday. I think it was called St. John's Episcopal Church, the big one right there in Albany, Georgia. And they didn't know what to do. They let me in. And I went in and I sat like around in the middle. Nobody bothered me. And I just left. So my group of organizers said, okay, we'll go next time. See how this works. And we went the next time and I could not get in. They said that I couldn't come in. So I just chatted with them for a minute or two, and then I went back. But it did hit the New York Times that the Episcopal Church was integrated in Albany, Georgia. And this group, the New York State careerists that had won the case by then, they would have an annual breakfast. So they asked, they had an award in my father's name, which the previous year they gave to my mother. So I guess they won the case probably around in 1961, maybe. I do want to find out when the case was won, the legal case. At any rate, the New York Times had the article that the Episcopal Church was integrated, and they wanted to honor me. That I guess it was the fall of '62, after I came back from Albany. I did get a chance to meet and talk with Dr. Septima Clark. Well, she's Septima Clark then, who's over the citizenship schools. And we say that mother of civil rights was Rosa Parks, that Septima Clark was the grandmother. And I later had an opportunity to live with Dr. Septima Clark in 1978, 77, 78, when I was doing the field work for my doctorate in Charleston, South Carolina. And she told me about how in around I think it was around 1916, so between 1916 and 1918, that she was protesting. She joined the NAACP. She was a teacher. And the Black teachers wanted to join the NAACP. And the different ones said they would. But they were told that if they did not get out of the NAACP, they would lose their jobs. And so Dr. Septima Clark was the only one who stood firm and did not take out or cancel her membership with the NAACP in Charleston. So she goes back, way back then, as the grandmother of the civil rights movement. And I had a very, very interesting time with Dr. Clark in Charleston, 1977, 78. At that time, I had driven down there from Illinois, University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And I just happened to run into her I was staying with a friend of mine, Millicent Brown, who we had worked together in Mississippi, who's from Charleston, Dr. Millicent Brown now. And I stayed with her for the summer, and then I have to look for a place for the rest of the year. And I happened to go to a church. I thought I would visit some churches in the Charleston area. So once I would take a Sunday and go to a different church. And this particular Sunday, I saw Septima Clark. I was going to her church. And I was saying, talking to her, and I was saying I was looking for a place to live. Did she know any place, any small apartments or something? She says, well, you can come and stay with us. I have an extra room. You like to rent it out and whatnot. I says, oh, fine, great. So I did go there, and so we became like a little partnership that anything that she had to do, I'd drive her around to her meetings and whatnot. And I got to know her family. And I also got a job teaching one course at the College of Charleston, where, by the way, I did meet Vernon Burton, who was a very, very interesting top scholar, which I learned a lot from. I saw something with his name on it recently, Dr. Vernon Burton. So I would learn a lot about Dr. Clark, Septima Clark, and participate with the awards that she was getting, the recognition that she was getting from the city. She told us about how she would stand outside the gates of the College of Charleston and look in because Black kids couldn't go there. And then later on, she got an honorary doctorate from the College of Charleston while I was there. So that was in 77, 78. And she also had a highway or road named after her, Dr. Septima Clark. She was on the day about how things happened. One thing happened as a result of another. When Dr. Clark worked with Andrew Young and Dorothy Cotton with the citizenship schools. Later on, when Andrew Young became ambassador under President Carter, and his wife became the head of the International Year of the Child, an honorary or a group that President Carter commissioned to call attention to children. And Dr. Clark was asked to be on that committee by Jean Young, Ambassador Young's wife. So they were going to convene a lot of people that were going to be involved with the International Year of the Child. And Dr. Clark was asked to come to the White House for that ceremony. And I was staying there with her, and she said, well, do you want to come? Would you like to, escort me, be with me, come, both of us go? I said, it's great. So I did have the opportunity, privilege of going with her. And we went to the Rose Garden, and I was around with several of the people that were at the International Year for the Child. I took a lot of photographs during that time in 1978.
And so what led you to come to Mississippi in 1962 after your summer in Albany, Georgia?
Okay, well, after I left Albany, Georgia, the summer of 62, fall of 62, SNCC had its conference in Nashville, and I did go to that, and I met a lot of SNCC people. And then we talked about opening a SNCC office in New York. We had the Friends of SNCC. Charles Sherrod, when I left Albany, says, we need you to raise money for SNCC and for the families that have been, the sharecroppers that have been thrown off their land because they tried to register to vote, because they had civil rights workers staying with them, because they were demonstrating for equal rights. We need you to help. And we need you to raise money. And get, he said, you got to get food, clothing, and books, and whatever you can get. So I had my walking papers. I had my direction of what I was supposed to do. So I go back and start teaching. And then in the few evenings after teaching, I would go to meet with SNCC folks. And I started trying to find out how I could get this, what I have to do to start organizing a mass meeting to raise money and find a place and all of that, and get in touch with groups. So by the spring, we were opening up a SNCC office, spring of '63, or it looks like. And I had gotten in touch with a group called the National Association of Rural Schools. And Kenneth Clark was on the board. This was a group of mostly union people who were raising money and issues relating to rural children. So I found that I was going to be able to have a mass meeting, I guess it was about February or March of '63, to raise money. And I was doing it in a couple of ways. One way was through affiliation with the rural schools, and they were having a luncheon. And so I was trying to see about getting money through that luncheon. And then another meeting, mass meeting in Harlem, one of the churches. And Bob Moses, I was told, okay, Bob Moses, he's in New York. I mean, he's from New York. And it'd be great if you could get him to speak at your mass meeting. I said, okay, well, so I contacted him, and he said, yeah, he would be able to come up, or he was coming up, and he would be my main keynote speaker. Then after he spoke, he said, well, I'd like to get you to come to Mississippi. He says that he thinks he can get money to start a literacy program, to develop literacy materials for the Black community in Mississippi, to know how to process all the things that they have to know about in order to register to vote, and some other kinds of activities that would help them be more active in citizenship. Well, at that time, I told him that I was planning some other things. I was teaching, and I was thinking of going off to grad school. I was staying there with my mom and my sister. But he wouldn't take no for an answer. And he called me from time to time and said, you've already worked in the movement, you know SNCC people, you're a teacher, you're creative, so on and so forth. And I still was saying no. But in the spring, in May, where we had this activity going on in Birmingham, the civil rights activity going in Alabama and going specifically in Birmingham, where the news media covered the attacking of the police of the to the Black members of the community that were um, just there trying to, with signs saying voting and all of that, and integrating some of the places. Here we have the dogs attacking them, the police with the bully clubs and the hoses, fire hoses, spraying people from all over the place. And here we have the Black men, women, and children dressed up, just trying to have peaceful protests, which we know we're supposed to be able to have as citizens. And the white police are attacking. And the people who are standing around looking, the white community, they're going crazy, just being outrageous, inhumane, and violent, racist people. So I just said, you know what? I'll go to Mississippi. I will go there and teach in this literacy program so we can get people to vote, get people registered, get people to vote, and to make some change. And if that's the least I can do is go there. But he said, I could come there for a year to get it started. So I said, well, I was working with the SNCC office in logistics for the March on Washington, because I would go there, 2-3 evenings and on the weekend. So I said, I'll go as soon as the March on Washington is over, we're finished with that, I'll go to Mississippi. And that's what I did. Bob said, I'm going to hire you as a field secretary. You'll make $10 a week. We'll find a place for you to stay. And that's what we'll do. And that's what I did. So some people say, well, what about your family? What did they say? And my mother, she knew what our history was, our legacy. And she knew that my father would say yes, I feel like she knew that I was doing what he was doing. I was doing what her mother was doing, and her brothers, and even my grandparents on my father's side. They faced discrimination, and they had to do things. So she just, wished me luck, keep in touch, and I guess I got on the bus again and went on down to Jackson to start with as a field secretary for the COFO for SNCC, and to be based out of the COFO office on Lynch Street. And I was put up with a family, the family of Jimmy and Carolyn Travis, Mr. Travis, who was also involved in the civil rights movement.
You mentioned, of course, coming with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and also working out of the COFO office, the Council of Federated Organizations. Can you just talk a second about what COFO was, the organizations that were there, and what you guys were doing out of the COFO offices?
Well, the COFO office that's the acronym for the Council on Federated Organizations. This is an office on Lynch Street, down from walking distance from Jackson State. Each civil rights organization had a desk, had a representative or more working there. Dave Dennis was the rep for CORE, and you had a number of SNCC folks, and you had Henry J. Kirksey, who had secured that place initially, I believe, where he was putting out a newspaper. Kirksey was a former military person, and he was he did cartography in the military, among other things. So later on, he was studying and charting the different factors relating to what the state government was getting away with in terms of allotment for monies to the Black community and to the white community for school and for all different things that people as citizens were supposed to get. And he showed how unequal everything was with his different maps and the gerrymandering of the districts of the voting and so on. He was putting out a newspaper, and so he let each of the different organizations have space. CORE, SCLC, SNCC. Was there another group? Was there another group?
NAACP.
And yeah, the ACP, yeah.
And CORE was the Congress of Racial Equality.
Yeah, Congress of Racial Equality, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, NACP, and SCLC. And so there was an emphasis on voting, voter registration and voting, and organizing the community there to get them to understand about voting sections and organizing everything so that people would know where to go to vote and how to vote and all that. So there's many different aspects to that. And in order to get people used to the voting process, we decided to have a mock election and run an integrated campaign with Aaron Henry as running for governor and Ed King, who was a chaplain at Tougaloo College, running for lieutenant governor. That was one project that was going on. Then we were decided to have the Freedom Schools, Freedom Summer, Freedom Schools, summer of '64. So we were organizing and getting things together to see how we're going to manage that. And then there are people going in and out of the office, it was the hub of the all the activities around the state for different levels of organizing. And then you had the Watts line, telephone line, I think, in the COFO office, where people that were in the SNCC offices and freedom houses in different parts of the country, in different parts of the state, could call in and let us know what was happening when there was something dangerous happening or some problem or what was needed, all of that. The hub was at the COFO office. Of course, we were in touch with the Atlanta SNCC. They had their Watts line and connection and reporting every week, reporting to Atlanta what happened and put it in the newsletter, SNCC newsletter. Contacting the media, the national media, to let them know, give reports of when people were being harassed or intimidated and so on. And then Kirksey's newspaper. What was the name of that newspaper? Do you recall?
I'm not sure, but perhaps was it the Mississippi Free Press? I'm not sure what Henry Kirksey's paper was.
Okay. I have a lot of documents. I haven't really had time to look at them recently. I got a lot of documents that would be great if I could look at them and refresh my memory about so many things. But I am a documentary person. I'm a historian, and from when I was in elementary school, my grandparents had scrapbooks, and we would go there and they would tell us about different things that happened and show us the scrapbook. And I just had that habit that I developed from the old days of keeping records of our family history, of things happening in the community, and all the things that were happening to Black people. That's something that all my relatives kept. What was happening to, we found out through the Black newspapers, and saved the documents about special important things. And I had Ebony magazines and Jet and all from years ago. I donated some of them to the University of Wisconsin, Madison, when they were collecting Black magazines. Uh, I had so many. I still have some. Yeah. And of course, books. I had the opportunity to go and read in the Schomburg collection in Harlem um, as someone in junior high school, because my aunt lived in Harlem on 135th Street. And when you get out the train on Lenox Avenue, the Schomburg Library is right there. And so I would go there and read and know that although we don't see ourselves very often in books in school, or we don't see our images in the movies, there is a place, the Schomburg collection, where people have written about Black people and the information is there. I know it exists, and however, we have to keep adding to it, and that has been a very strong motivation of mine for some of the things that I do relating to documentation, saving documents and keeping things organized. And of course, the other part of it is the visuals. Creating visuals, creating documentation, and making sure that people know that it's available and it tells the story of all the things that have been happening to us and continue to happen to us, and what we're doing to happen to ourselves. What are we doing in our own favor? How are we fighting the war against us? And so we have documentation of that, what's happening to us and what's happening by us. So that's been an important part of a mission in my life.
Dr. Derby, we are coming to the end of the first part of this oral history. We have a lot more ground to cover. I thought I would ask one more question, though. You mentioned your involvement in the 1963 March on Washington, and I am aware of the following image that hopefully you can see here. And I was wondering if you might talk about this image and your involvement in the March on Washington as we kind of wrap up the first part of this oral history.
Well, as I mentioned to you, I was working with SNCC in New York SNCC. Julie Prettyman was the head of the New York SNCC office, and I was with her, communicating with her and interacting with her as a friend. And as we got it started, And so I just consider myself one of the workers for the New York SNCC office. And as such, when we decided to have the March on Washington, our office, along with the Corps and the other groups, and Bayard Rustin, Joanne Grant, who's in the Guardian newspaper, and others, we had to work together to figure out how the best logistics would be put in place in order to have a successful march. And so I was there, with the organizers, as you can see. So
Can you
I went with the
describe
team.
where you are in this photograph?
Yes, I can tell you about, I can identify several people in there that shows that they were involved in the civil rights movement back there in 1963. So if you see the man with the white hat and the glasses in the front, I'm right behind him. And we're singing We Shall Overcome. And then next to me on the right is Annell Ponder, who was from Georgia. And next on the left side of the hat, that's Charlie Cobb. And behind him, and he worked in Mississippi, and behind him, the little face there is Martha Prescott Norman, who worked in Alabama, and she's a good friend of mine. And then we have back there, sort of behind my hair, there's a white guy, and that's Mindy Samstein, who worked in Mississippi. And then we have over here in the front, I just can't think of his name. Both of those two people, men in the front, I knew them, but I can't think of who they are now. But behind his shoulder, the one in the front with the button one, that's Bond. That is James Bond. Mike, that's James Bond, who is Julian Bond's brother. And then over here next to Julian Bond is Andrew Young. No, right there in the dark suit. That's right. And then over there where you first put that arrow, that's Julian Bond, James Bond's brother. And right behind him with the sunglasses, that's Casey Hayden. Sandra Casey Hayden. Sandra Casey Hayden. She was recruited to work on the Literacy Project. The Literacy Project, as we were talking about, it was based at Tougaloo College. And she and I and a lady named Helen O'Neill, we were roommates at we were roommates working on the Literacy Project. Now, to her right, her shoulder over there is Rims Barber. That's him, Rims Barber. And I think the one with the sunglasses next to him might have been Avon Rollins. Looked like it could have been Avon Rollins. Oh, and come back here over to this. See this lady with the white blouse on in the front. Okay, so her hair, the left side of her hair, go right behind that. Keep going. Yeah, that guy right there. That's MacArthur Cotton, I think. I think that was MacArthur Cotton. No, wait a minute. I know somebody. There's somebody else here behind James Bond. I think to the left of James Bond might be Sam. Oh, not Sam. Kind of have an idea of who that is, but I can't think of it. Then the white guy right behind James Bond. I know who he is. I can't think of it right now, but that guy, not with the glasses, yeah. Oh, I see somebody else. Now you see this guy in the front, the big tall guy, right behind his lips with that little, yeah. Um, I know who that is. What's her name? I could get her name. I know what it is. I know where I have it somewhere. Can't think of that, but I know her who she is.
Well, that's okay, Dr.
That's
Derby.
about that's about all I can think of. Oh, Marion Wright was in this picture too, but she's covered up with, there's a couple of pictures that of this same scene, and they show a little bit different view, and there's other people you can see in that one. Yeah, this was life. Yep.
This is a great photograph, and I think a good place for us to stop. I look forward to continuing our conversation in the second half of this oral history and talking more about your experiences in Mississippi and about your photography and some of your own images and exhibition and work after arriving in Mississippi. Dr. Derby, anything else you'd like to add right now as we close out this part of the oral history?
No, I can't really think of anything as far as talking about my background. I do want to thank the Mississippi Arts Council or the Mississippi Arts Council for organizing um, this, or seeing that it's possible to do this interview, and certainly to thank you and the Margaret Walker Center for organizing this. And I'm glad to participate in this type of program. It makes me remember things again, and think about things that I need to look up and think about. And I'm just hoping that I have more time to get out some of my old documents and look them up, and be able to give some more information to let us know about all the intricacies and different components of history, and to know that it's so important to document and to keep your information somewhere where it's accessible and to others, and to keep it organized. And that's why people would say, "Are you dragging all those files around and those file cabinets and suitcases and all of that?" Yes, I still have some things that I had when I was very young, like my record player, the portable record player that I started working in my uncle's store when I was in elementary school. I wanted to save so I could buy a record player, and I still have that record player. I told my mother, "No, I'm going to keep it in the house." That's the important thing about staying in one house. There's people who move away, keep moving every 2 or 3 years, or another house, or something. Let me move here, move there, and then they lose their things. And so I have said that wherever I go, I'm taking my stuff with me, or I'm sending it to my mother's house, and we'll put it in the basement. So I always said that when I get a house, it's got to be a house with a basement or an attic, so I can save my papers and all of my belongings. So word to the wise is find some way to keep your things. Don't put it in a storage unit because you'll lose it.
Well, thank you, Dr. Derby. This has been great, and I look forward to continuing our conversation.
Okay, well, thank you, Robbie.